moral outrage that people with disabilities can be put in such a horrific place. It did not happen a long time ago. It's happening right now as we speak. I believe in invisible programs. I don't want you to drive by saying, oh, that's where they live. There's a relationship between the severity of your disability and your level of loneliness. Our life is better because of other people. When we can get people with disabilities to work with other people and talk to other people, that really increases their quality of life. Silent, no longer. That start speaking up for people with disabilities. They should have the same rights as everybody else. They should be afforded the same opportunities as everybody else.
This is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, where we are here to educate, equip, and inspire people to build extraordinary companies. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Now, let's get it started. Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. My name is Rick Meekins. I'm going to be your host today, and in our studio, we have Robert Slack. How are you today, sir?
Great. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you. Folks, if you haven't done it already, we would love it if you'd like, subscribe, hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Without further ado, let's get to it. So, Robert, give us a little background, who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Well, thank you for asking. My name is Robert Stack. I am the CEO and president of Community Options, and I founded the organization about 35 years ago. My organization's mission is to develop housing and employment for people with significant disabilities. I started this in my living room a long, long time ago in a small row home in Bordentown, New Jersey, and by myself. And then I got friends to become members of my board. And eventually, and then I went to the state of New Jersey, Trenton, and with a $354 check, I incorporated Community Options. And fast forward to today, we support about 6,000 families throughout the country. We're in 12 states. We're in over 60 cities, and we have about 75 to 8,000 employees.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. What was it? What was it that drove you to do that? I mean, I know I'm from New Jersey. I know the Bordentown area. What was it? What was that thing that said, hey, I need to make a difference here?
Well, since I was younger, I worked and helped out services for people with disabilities, and I noticed how they were marginalized. They were segregated. They were put in large institutions throughout the country. And in Bordentown specifically, now that you mention it, the Bordentown had this academy that was originally built for segregating Black youth, and they kept people there. It was not a very good, pleasant place to be. And it was a series of buildings, and they eventually moved out, and they had this giant facility, and they opened up the Johnstone Training and Research Center in Bordentown. And that's where I first really started getting involved in an institution of that nature in New Jersey. I had been involved in New York, but this was the first time in New Jersey. And there it was crazy. They did experiments on people all the time. It was training and research. So they had a special place called the Yepsen unit, which was a prison where they kept people with disabilities who were bad, and as they would phrase it, and they would keep them into these cells, and it was horrific. And as soon as I saw it, I was very young at the time. I was not even 30, and I said, actually, I was in my 20s, and I said, this place has to be closed. It's horrible. And then they had the Hayes unit, which was for people that were blind and deaf. And that was also bad. But the worst, the most disgusting thing they would do is they would give people who lived there milkshakes. And the milkshakes were laced with fetus hepatitis. And then they would give them hepatitis, and they would try different experiments to see what they could do to try to cure hepatitis.
My
And
goodness.
yeah, it was they were called them fecal shakes, and the people didn't know it at all. And it was run by an absolutely horrific man who isn't there anymore. He passed away a long time ago, and it was just not a good facility. And I was so glad to help close that institution and get the folks that lived in there into a community-based programs.
Wow. That's That's horrific. That's terrible. I'm glad that you did that. I'm glad that you were able to make a difference. What does it take though? I mean, to have a vision. To me, that sounds like you had a very big vision to make a very big difference. I mean, what does it take? Not only to kind of craft that vision, but also to pursue it with the assumption that hey, you can get this done.
I think right now, even to this day, I am struck with the same situation I was a long time ago. Moral outrage. Moral outrage. I just became outrageously morally so objectionable that people with disabilities can be put in such a horrific place. And you said New Jersey. So as long as we're in New Jersey, let's stay with New Jersey. There's still institutions. There's an institution in Southern New Jersey called the Vineland Developmental Center in Vineland, New Jersey, Southern New
Hmm.
Jersey. It used to be called the Vineland State School for Feeble-Minded Women of Childbearing Age. Now,
I mean,
seriously, and the Vineland Developmental Center has now an East Campus and a West Campus. So let's stop for 1 second. It was all women, right?
mhm.
But the thing that's interesting is East Campus, West Campus. In the 80s, 70s, and 60s, it was called the main campus and the colony. Yes, because they not only segregated you by sex, they segregated you by race. And I went there and I met like this superintendent of the institution, the head of it. And I write about it in my book. And he reminded me of, I don't know if your audience is as old as I am, of W.C. Fields. He had that look of the bulbous nose and he drank too much alcohol. And I said to him, you're going to have to get this institution closed. And he said, but the people are happy. They're happy, happy, happy. They cut the lawn, they take care of things. All the girls do everything we need them to do. And I said, yeah, but they don't get paid. And he had his own giant house on
Mhm,
the grounds of this institution. Kind of sounds a little like a plantation, doesn't it?
mhm, it does.
And it still exists now. And the governor of New Jersey now, and the governors all along have always said this is okay, and they let this entire facility operate just like that for women. And if you go farther south near Cape May, New Jersey, there's the Woodbine School. It was called the Woodbine Developmental Center, but it used to be called the Woodbine Colony for boys.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, just the nomenclature of the words should just sum up the whole thing. I just find it fascinating that we're this is 2026 and I'm still talking about this. And when I talk to people about this who are younger or they go like, "Well, that happened a long time ago." It did not happen a long time ago. It's happening right now as we speak.
That's ridiculous. That's horrifying. That's mortifying. I'm from South Jersey. I was born and raised. I kind of heard of these things, but it was like there was no real connection to exactly what it was. I mean, everything I guess goes around in kind of rumors. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
gosh, my gosh. Wow. So moral outrage drove all of this. So you decided there was a problem, and I want to look at this. I want to kind of walk through like an entrepreneurial journey, with building this thing, and then I want to get into a little bit more about your book. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
All right, fantastic. So you had this moral outrage. You said, "Okay, I want to do something." What were your steps? How did you mobilize? Is really what it comes down to.
Well, I knew I had to figure out a way to get people out of these institutions.
Mhm.
And I went to I went to the Johnstone place in New Jersey, and at the time the governor was Governor Florio. Governor Florio was having a problem. His problem was he couldn't make ends meet with his budget. He was a funny governor. He's passed away. I always laugh because he hated insurance companies. He made the joke. He'd say they call themselves the good hands people. The question is, what part of your anatomy do they have in their hands? But in any event, went to his office and said, you could save $20 million, which was a lot of money in New Jersey, if you close this institution. So they said, how would we do it? So we wrote a plan on how to do it, and I started taking people out. So it was all financially driven. It wasn't because they didn't like the fact that the people were being experimented on, because the people were being abused, because women in the Vineland Developmental Center became pregnant, but there were no male people with disabilities that were there. It was because they said, well, it's better if we can save money. That's why. So I took the people out who a lot of people said would never make it in the community.
Hmm.
And I found them jobs. I found them places to live. I developed housing, and I didn't have any money at all. And I used every kind of, you want to talk about entrepreneurial. I had very complex funding methodologies. It wasn't, I'm not a trustafarian. My dad was a milkman, and I
Hmm.
certainly didn't have any money from a bank. I didn't have any money at all. My primary funders were Visa, MasterCard, Diners, American Express, Sears, whatever I could get a hold of as a credit card. And then I took a second mortgage out on my little row house so that I could make payroll and said if I could take these people out, I could do it. Well, the state said I got a contract with them, but the state said okay, but I had to fund it for a while because
Hmm.
I needed to do that. And that
Hmm.
was very complicated. I mean, I went to every normal insurance company you could think of for health, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, all of them. They're like, you don't even have a track record. We're not going to give you any insurance. My first insurance company was called Benny Med. I used to pray every night that none of my staff got sick because I didn't know what they'd be covered or what would happen because it was such bad. But I had no track record, no experience, and I had nothing else to hold on to.
Did you have experience running a business?
No, not really. No, I'd never run anything short of, delivering newspapers or working, but I worked for places, but I never really ran anything. Everything I learned, it was from, reading, and that was that.
So you decided that you have this vision. You go out and hire people. You're going to put them on payroll. You're going to give them insurance, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a mighty big risk. I mean, where did you get the guidance for this from?
Well, no one. I mean, I just kind of figured it out how to do it. Well, before this, I have to say, years ago, I worked for United Cerebral Palsy, which was a nonprofit, and I
Okay.
kind of learned how it worked from them. And I learned what was bad and what was good in the sense that they were a large, well-known nonprofit, but
Hmm.
they were individually operated, so they spent a lot of money needlessly on accounting and on a lot of other things. I knew that if I could do it where it was a single entity, I could save money on that sort of thing, and I would do that. And I was the youngest. I got my first job in a high level executive director when I was in my 20s as the executive director of United Cerebral Palsy of New Jersey, which, by the way, was $50,000 budget, $100,000 deficit, and the board hadn't met in 3 years. So I kind of like learned from fire by baptism, you know,
Yes.
what was going on there. But I learned what they did right and what they did wrong, and I took the best practices and I turned it into community options.
Nice, nice. And did you start this organization as a not for profit, or was it? How did that come? How did you make a decision about that?
Well, I sat in literally my little row home and I said, profit, nonprofit, profit, nonprofit. And I thought, well, why would I set it up as a for profit? Because I wasn't doing it for the money. And I never thought that I would actually even do anything with it. And then I thought, well, if I got nonprofit, I'd be able to come to people like you and people in your audience and say, can you contribute to helping advance this who weren't, trying to get money back? And
Yeah.
I also felt that, I could probably apply for grants from different foundations and hopefully do it that way. So I called, so I literally called, six of my friends who I went to college with, grew up with, and said, I'm going to start this company, Community Options. Can I put you on the board? And they said, sure. And they didn't give me any money, but they at least lent me their name, and it helped with the fiduciary responsibilities associated with the organization.
Mm-hmm. When you set up your board, I'm gonna say we because I've worked with not for profits before. So we typically recruit friends and family. Did you have expectations for them when you started the board, or was it just just for paperwork's sake?
No, well, they had a variety of backgrounds, and so I tried to hone in on those backgrounds, and I really tried to give them, tasks that I wanted them to do. Now, whether they my one of my chairs was a vice president of Hershey, and he was my roommate in college, and I kept on trying to get him to get money from the Hershey Foundation, and he tried, but he never did.
Yeah.
Another guy was head chef at a restaurant called Elaine's, which was, a famous Manhattan bistro, and he had his own restaurant. And I asked him to help me with that, and he would try to get, people were celebrities involved, but it never really happened. So, there were people that I tried to get involved in, and they were all wonderful people, and they all supported me
Mhm.
mentally, and they all kind of like acted like a psychologist to me, if you will. But they weren't able to financially help me at all because none of them really had any significant levels of money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How did it feel, being executive director essentially and having to wear like multiple hats until this vision until you start getting checked from the state, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult, and even when we started getting paid, what the state did was we said, look, if you look at an institution, like even let's take today, real time. Today, you could walk into El Paso, Texas, and there's an institution there. It costs $400,000 a year to live in that institution. Think about
Wow.
that.
Wow.
400, you could put them on the Queen Mary for every day for the whole year, and they would have a bet. They would be cheaper, and they would be able to be on the Queen Mary. But they're costing the state of Texas between three and $400,000 a year per person. And I'm showing that
Wow.
I could place those people for $60,000 with a set with staff that would work with them, with a small house, and they would live like you and I do. So they would live in a small house,
Hmm.
they would be staffed. They would learn how to do basic things like cook like you and me. They would
Hmm.
learn how to clean the house. They would have a regular job or some sort of a thing that they could do that would be in the community. So they
Yeah.
would have this, and it would be great. It would be way, way, way less money. So when I was doing that in the state of New Jersey, when I started, they said, "Okay, this is a great idea." I was at the point where I had what was called, and I know none of the audience would have heard of this maybe. It's called the one right system. It was a checkbook where, you wrote the name Rick Smith, and then you took out the FICA and the SUI, you had to do the calculations, and then you wrote out the payroll check and you ripped it off and you gave it to your employees. And that was how I had to start everything in the
Yeah.
beginning. So yeah, I was my own bookkeeper, I was my own CEO, I was my own HR, human resource manager. I was doing all my own quality assurance, and I was working at night and during a day. And I was on call, and I can remember the 2 o'clock in the morning sleeping, and all of a sudden my phone ringing and me running to the phone. And the person that opened up we opened up our first three group homes, and the guy said, "We have a problem." And I said, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "We can't find the plunger."
Could have been much, much worse.
Yeah. But, that was the kind of stuff you had to start off with. So I had no infrastructure, no one to help, and so that's what we did. But, it worked out well, obviously.
So you start a group home, which in my mind is going to be more expensive than some other places. How did you get funding for that?
Well, again, what I did was I went to all my houses. I have right now 750 homes. And all the homes are no more than four-bedroom homes. They're small houses, and usually, and like in depending on what state you're in, Pennsylvania, there's usually no more than two or three people that live in a home. If you saw any of my houses throughout the country, you wouldn't know that they were houses for people with disabilities because I believe in invisible programs. I don't want you to drive by saying, "Oh, that's where they live." I would rather us be invisible. Our vans or vehicles, they don't have any logos. We don't want to stand out at all. We want to just be like a regular house. But what I do is I went originally to a bank and said, "Look, I'm going to buy this house. How are you going to do it?" And I said, "I can amortize the mortgage and the operating contract that I get from the state." I'd show them the contract with the state of New Jersey, and I would show
Nice.
them that I was getting, for example, in those days, the $40,000 a person. So I was showing 160,000 a year, which would cover the staff, it would cover the food, it would cover the insurance, and a small portion of it would cover the mortgage. And the problem I had in the beginning was down payments. So I had no money even for a down because you needed 20% down. So I spent a lot of time initially looking for homes that I thought were way, way, way underpriced. And then I
Yeah.
would try to hammer them more. And then in those days, you could go to a bank and the bank would would do an appraisal. And if the
Uh-huh.
appraisal was much higher than the actual agreed upon price, they would build in that in. And so you could essentially finance a house with nothing down. And so for the first several houses, I was buying with nothing down.
Wow. 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 Back in those days, what were some really important operating lessons that you learned?
That there was a lot of them, but I would say that one of the things was, you have to really You have to always make sure that you're really in the the fundamental granular level with everything. You can't just take anybody's word. You know, the old saying, "Trust but verify." You can't take anybody at face value. I mean, people are fundamentally good. That I believe. People are not bad people, but people don't know better in certain regards.
Hmm.
Example: the first few houses I opened, one house had just an exorbitant budget for the food, and I was really pulling my hair out. And the guy there was nice, and I said, "What are you doing? Give me some of the ideas of what you're preparing for meals." And he's like, "Beef stroganoff," and he's giving me these normal kinds of menus, and I'm thinking,
Right.
"That's great. I don't understand, but why is it so expensive?" So I finally said, "Well, why don't I come over for dinner so I could meet everybody and hang out?" And then I realized the guy was a really nice guy. He really cared about the people he supported. His sister, who passed away, had autism, and he was a really nice guy, but he didn't know anything about cooking at all. So he bought nothing but frozen dinners. Now, do you know how expensive frozen dinners can be? If you're
Yeah.
so that was just so I'm like, whoa, dude, you got to buy like a whole chicken, and you can, and
Yeah.
I had to get down to that level. So those are fundamental things that you can't take anything for granted, and that and I think that again, if you give people a chance, they can amaze you, and to have an open mind with some of their ideas. I'll never forget one of the first people with disabilities I took out of an institution. He was in a wheelchair, and I said, "What do you want to be?" And he said, "Oh, when I want to be an astronaut." Now, you might think that that's kind of reductive, but the truth of the matter is, it pointed out to me that in space he wouldn't need a wheelchair.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
smart.
there's a lot of interesting, things you learn as and never to there's a reason behind a lot of the comments that they make.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. I can imagine. One of the things that you didn't talk about, so we've got multiple homes, and again, we'll stick in New Jersey for the moment. You have multiple homes all over New Jersey, and you have a model that basically has to be replicated. You get the house, you staff the house, you bring the people in. I didn't hear you talk about really managing that and just making sure that each home was run in a way that maintained the standards that you set. How did you work with that?
Well, I wrote everything. I wrote everything from the articles of incorporation to, the bylaws of the organization, but I also wrote like manuals on how to operate a small house. Way that I set up the paradigm was I have, staff that are hired. There might be, for example, there might be 3 people or 4 people living in a house. That means that from 7 to 3, there's like one person on staff. 3 to 11, there's another person. 11 to 7, there's somebody awake overnight to make sure that if there's a fire or there's a problem, they can get them out to safety. Those people would report to a so 2 or 3 of those houses or 4 of those houses would report to a person who was called a program manager, and that program managers would let's say had 4 houses would eventually report to a director of residential programs, and that director of residential programs would report to an executive director who was indigenous to the area. So if you take New Jersey, there's 21 counties, and of the 21 counties, we're probably in about 18 of them. So we have an executive director who's from Mercer County, who lives in West Windsor, Ida, and she does a phenomenal job. And we have someone in Middlesex County and Burlington County, and I can go on and on like that. So each one, and all of those folks would report to like a regional to a state director for New Jersey, and that state director would manage all that. And then I have a whole side, which is the now it's I have an entire financial operation with literally 80 staff who do nothing but payroll and do nothing but finance and billing and that sort of thing. And then I have a human resource department, which has about 20 people who make sure everyone's hired properly, trained properly, the background checks are made, all of those sorts of things are done as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's I mean, that's growth. I mean, that's how you grow an organization. What was something that was like difficult, something that was unexpected, something that went really wrong? And how did you come back from it?
I think the most unbelievable issue, the one of the and it was still I'm still recovering from this one, is about 3 years ago, we had hired this really wonderful woman, and, she had come from a rough family. She dropped out of a black college. She was just a terrific woman, and
Mhm.
she was a staff person, and she worked with these 2 people with disabilities, and they were lovely, and they were both severely involved, and she was gonna take them to one of our programs in Hillsborough, and this is about 3 years ago, and so she was, in one of the vehicles that we had, and she was gonna pull out of the road onto Route 1, and it was a green light, we have video to prove it, and she pulled out, and this massive truck going, 80 miles an hour with a big wall that was gonna be used for some sort of a warehouse, project out, like, hit them, totally incinerated, killed all 3 of the people. Yeah, and, so we had to deal with that with our families. I went to 3 funerals, and, that was just horrific, and, the truck driver is, being, and still, being on trial or whatever, and the trucking company and all this other stuff, and so we're just, to deal with that, it was just a tragedy that I couldn't do anything to avoid, and, it was just horrific, and, I always said, everyone talks about these new self-driving cars, these Teslas. If I would have had a self-driving car like a Tesla for them, it would have automatically stopped when it saw the truck coming, and I wish I would have had, and, you always wish for things that could have happened, but
Yeah.
it didn't, and so the 3 people were pat and I had to tell a father that his daughter was incinerated. It was probably one of the most difficult things of my life, and as I said, I haven't you never recover from something like that. I make a point of knowing the people we support. I make a point of knowing the staff, and, it was very difficult.
Wow. 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 I'm so sorry you had to experience that. That's wow. That's life changing.
It
That's
is.
life changing. Wow. You moved to so you were in New Jersey. You're pretty much established there. What state did you go to first from there?
Well, we opened up in Pennsylvania, and we were all because it was close. We all went all the way to Pittsburgh. We opened up all over. There's 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and we're in a lot of those, and again, we develop relationships. We have a ver that now we have Pennsylvania is the biggest state we operate in the whole country, and they're very open-minded, they're very good. They only have 2 institutions left. The governor, his name is, Governor Shapiro. He's a good governor, he cares about what happens. His wife has come to see some of our programs, and, she's a really, really nice lady, and they've been giving us a lot of funding, and then we were in Maryland, that's been good. South Carolina, we're actually one of the latest places we opened up was Myrtle Beach, and we're all the way to the west in Utah and Salt Lake City and Ogden, we're in Albuquerque, and we're in Santa Fe and Las Cruces, and all through Texas and Tennessee and Iowa. Iowa was an interesting state. Can I tell you about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Iowa, we just opened up there recently, and this is just like 2 years ago, because this Department of Justice under, President Biden was looking at the Iowa, institution, and they said that it was terrible, and they wanted to close it down, and I was reading about their lawsuit online in the middle of the night because I read these things, and, it turned out they had they had a direct care people who came up with this idea that if you overhydrate people, they won't get the flu. So they kept on giving these people that lived in this institution gallons of water, and then they went to the hospital. So when the Department of Justice went in, they said, "You have to you have to reform this institution." So at the time, Governor Reynolds was the governor of, she still is the governor of Iowa. She's not going to run anymore. And I said to her, I said, "Look, you got to close this place down." And her staff said, "Okay," and they did. They said, "We're going to get everybody out of this institution." And that was another like wild experience that I saw where people. And this is like 3 years ago. So let's go. This is 2000. Let's say not 2023. Let's say 2000. The year
Huh?
2000. There's a dietitian sitting around, and she said, I'm a little concerned about the folks living in this building. There's 25 men living in this building, and one almost choked on a peanut butter sandwich, and then a week later, a guy almost choked on a hot dog, and they could get sick. Now, all the other men never did. They were all eating normal food. So
Mhm.
she, in her infinite wisdom, decreed that everyone in that building from that day forward would have to eat nothing but pureed food.
Knew you were gonna say that. Oh my gosh.
So all of the men lived in that facility, and we took them out like 3 years ago. They had never had a cheeseburger. They had never had, a piece of chicken. They never had, anything. They never had, anything that was a solid food. And it was very difficult because our dietitian people had to work with them to try to get them where they could, swallow food. They were
Yeah.
thick, and they it just never you wanna and it was all sanctioned by an independent team, a dietitian and a therapist and a speech therapist and a physical therapist and blah, 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 and sanctioned by some doctor, and they just all said, "Yeah, this is okay to do." And again, it's not considered abuse, it's not considered neglect because it was sanctioned by therapists. But really, I mean, this is criminal, and it was allowed to happen, and I'm glad that it was called the Glenwood Center, and I'm glad in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and I'm glad to see that it was closed down, and I'm glad that I could literally go and sit down with one of these guys and watched him, as funny as this might sound, eat an entire ear of corn, and the corn, by the way, in Iowa is very good, and eat this ear of corn and, like, be able to chew it and swallow it. It's just amazing, and those it's the little things in life that give us the greatest pleasures.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you made an impact across the country, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal. What you're doing. I mean, it's one of the big things for me is the human side of things. I feel like we lose so much of that, with our capitalism and everything else. So I'm really excited for the work that you're doing. I'm curious. You've told me about the number of you've got over 700 homes. You're in 21 states. What are some stats about the people that are in the program?
Well, first of all, what I've learned is there's a direct relationship between the severity of your disability and your level of loneliness,
Mhm. And
okay?
your level of
Loneliness.
loneliness. Wow. Yeah.
There's a relationship between the severity of your disability and your level of loneliness. That's the first thing. The other thing that I keep on telling parents, and this is important, is you will outlive your children, most of you, by at least 35 years. And you better figure
Yeah.
out what to do now. But the other thing I've learned is that just as you and I have so many friends and family, our life is better because of other people. We live life because everyone can help each other, whether they're going to talk to each other about the thunder they just heard, or whether they're going to talk to each other about something wonderful going on in their lives or something terrible in their lives, and that we need to do that. We have a lot of statistics on employment. We get a lot of people with disabilities jobs. So, we all work for money. There's no two ways about that. But we also work for relationships. And
Yes.
when we can get people with disabilities to work with other people and talk to other people and their peers, who are not people with disabilities, just people in the community, in jobs, that really increases their quality of life and it increases their longevity. We have so many people that have lived a much longer life, I believe, and I can't prove this, can only do it anecdotally right now, who live a better life relative to a longer life because they've had more people involved in what they do. They don't they don't have as much effect of being, alone or isolated. So I think that they live a much better life.
Mm, mm, mm. We've talked about people with disabilities on a grand scale, right? And I think one of the things that happens sometimes is we have a stigma. We have a certain belief about what that looks like. Can you do me a favor and just kind of break some of those stigmas? Help us think differently about people with disabilities.
I mean, they're first of all, there's not a person that's listening to this or watching this show who hasn't had a person that they know, either from a family member or a friend of a family or a neighbor's friend or someone from school or work that doesn't have a person that doesn't know a person with a disability. So everybody's life is affected by disabilities. It's a fact, and there's an estimate of 3 to 4% of the entire population of the world has developmental disability, and you can break it up into so many different ways. For example, people with intellectual disabilities, they might not be able to do math as fast as you or I, or they may not be able to have other issues, but they certainly have other kinds of things that they can benefit from and help people with. And I'll tell you, I'll tell you a quick story. You know, one of the people that I work with, he has Down syndrome, and he's a happy guy, and his family's wealthy. So he was able to sit in a box, a fancy box, watching the Washington football team play. And the people in the box were very prominently wealthy people. And he turned around in this giant stadium. And this is how people with disabilities can bring you a gift. He turned around in this giant stadium in the same box, and he turned and he looked at this guy and he said, "Well, how are you, Magic Johnson? My name is Jonathan." And Magic Johnson said, "Well, it's nice to meet you, Jonathan. How are you?" He goes, "I'm fine. Magic, how are your aids? Do they hurt much?" And he said, "No, I'm doing fine." Now, he asked a question that everyone in that stadium probably wanted to know, but of course they thought that it was politically incorrect to bring up. But he was totally, absolutely unvarnished question that had nothing to do with, he was genuinely concerned about Magic Johnson's health.
Hmm.
And these are little things that people with disabilities can bring with them that we don't really think about.
Yeah.
And if you look at, I mean, look at somebody like Helen Keller and what she did to look at Stevie Wonder. There's this guy, the music that this man brought the world every day. I mean, it,
Mhm.
it just is amazing how many people with disabilities actually enrich the lives of so many other people.
I love that. They enrich the lives of so many other people. That's beautiful. I've seen that. I've experienced that, and I'm absolutely glad that you brought that up. Let's switch gears real quick. Let's talk about your book. What's tell us about your book first and foremost.
Yes, Silent No Longer is the name of the book, and it's available in any line from Amazon to Barnes& and Noble to whatever you want. It's published by Simon& and Schuster, and the purpose of the book is to talk about people with disabilities who have been marginalized, much the same as I told you, only with a lot more concrete stories that are actually a lot more heavy than the ones that I've talked about, even worse than being given, a pureed diet all of their lives. And I cover not only that, but the plight of how people with disabilities have been, really hurt. When Aristotle, who started saying the deaf were not educable, he kind of set a bad tone, if you will. There and say, "Wow, if he said that, there must be true." And then I explore ideas like when Nazi Germany, and then back to New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson. He was before he was the president of the United States, and before he was the president, and in between being the president of the Princeton University, he was the governor of the state of New Jersey. He was the first governor in the country to sign a mandatory eugenics sterilization law for every woman that had a disability.
My goodness.
So any woman that had a disability, they had to be mandatorily sterilized. And he signed that law. He was the first one. And it caught on to a lot of other states as well. So I talk a little bit about that and how, ridiculous that was and how erroneous, because you don't, that doesn't have anything to do with what kind of offspring you're going to produce. So I talk about all those issues. I talk about the issues about sub minimum wage and about how in a lot of states they'll say, well, you could produce so much. So because you have a disability, you
Mhm.
will only be paid, 5 cents an hour based on your level of productivity. And let's be honest here. If we paid people based on their level of productivity, there'd be a lot of people in Washington, D.C. making 25 cents a week, right? So that's still legal in this state. I mean, in this country right now, in most states. As a matter of fact, I gave a presentation in New York, and some guy said, "Not in New York. No, that doesn't." I said, "No, it happens in New York, and it's the same place just as everywhere else." So that's a horrible kind of situation, but it's true. And I also talk about the fact that people with disabilities are unable to be looked at the same way as everyone else in the rubs of them being marginalized, and how we have to kind of work on changing perceptions and laws and a lot of other things that are going on that could be beneficial to them.
Wow, wow. And you said we can get this at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, it's on in some bookstores. It's all over the place. You can order it anywhere you want, and I of course I'm going to be biased, but I cover a lot of the people that we supported. It's got a lot of I've met with several governors. I've met with a lot of people. The forward is by Geraldo Rivera, who's been very helpful. He helped close the Willowbrook Institution, and he's been very supportive of us. And it's got a lot of other endorsements by some pretty prominent authors as well.
Amazing, amazing. What do you want someone to do as a result of reading the book?
Well, I give a manifesto at the end, and I think several things they should do relative to voting, relative to you can't. Anybody who criticizes what's going on in this country and doesn't vote should be quiet. They have no right. If you don't vote, that's wrong. You should vote. Vote for whatever you believe in. They should also work to educate themselves on the issues before they make a decision who they're going to vote for. They shouldn't base their vote on other. They should base it on whether the beliefs match their beliefs from an
Yeah.
ethical perspective. They should start looking at people with this. I'm tired of special education, special school, special this, taking the special bus. Treat people with disabilities don't want to be called special. They want to be regular, just like everybody else. And
Yeah.
honestly, the title of the book is what I want people to be: silent no longer. That they need to start speaking up for people with disabilities. They have the rights. They should have the same rights as everybody else. They are born in this country. They're citizens of this country, and they should be afforded the same opportunities as everybody else in this country.
Absolutely. 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 Fantastic. If someone wants to learn more about your work, perhaps, they want to, be a board member or, whatever that is, they see a problem, that needs to be addressed. I mean, what's the best way? What's the best way to connect with your organization?
Well, you can definitely. We have a giant website, Community Options Inc. And on there, I'm very accessible. I have an email, Robert Stack at comop.org. It's on there. They can write me directly. They can write to their local execs. If it's a person living in, say, Lubbock, Texas, and they want services for their son in Lubbock, Texas, they can look at the executive director there and contact them. If it's in Manhattan, they can do it there. If it's in Harrisburg, it's there. Wherever they want to get services, we'll provide them. And if they need any information or they need any expertise on anything at all, we're available to help them with that.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you so much for taking us on your entrepreneurial journey. I thought that was amazing. That's not a conversation, from a nonprofit perspective that we have all the time, but also, just sharing your passion. I mean, this was so educational for me. It was like, a lot of heart moments for me. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate your stewardship and your support. God bless.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And folks, we'll have all those links on the show notes. So if you check it out on YouTube or wherever you go, you'll be able to go to his website or get the book. And we will catch you next time on the next episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We'll catch you there.